Thank you so much. The honor is all mine, and so it's a precious moment in time. And to be privileged to have Robert M. Ball as a mentor of mine who advised me across 3 decades, really. How lucky could one be? And he is still bringing us to the room. He, as a man himself, his legacy has brought us to this room, and we are at his table doing the work that needs to be done since we're all in this together. He obviously leaving us and collaborating with us in building the National Academy of Social Insurance, knew what was ahead and how important it was, and how important social insurance is as deriving its unique strength from the principle that the best form of self-protection is mutual aid on a universal scale. When everyone contributes, everyone wins. This slide, let's see. Is representative of the first debate that I did. This is a result of Bob Ball's getting me in trouble, which he regularly did in the kindest, gentlest, most calm way. Calling me when I was at DuPont Plaza Hotel staying for working on something, and I was standing on my tippy toes for the phone, those big black phones in the basement, calling him back, and he said, "Carroll, you've got to go to the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare." When Bob speaks, one answers. And so the next thing I know, the Gerontological Society, I'm on a committee, a policy committee, and we're talking about appropriations. The National Institute on Aging has just been founded. And they're giving me my marching orders about going on the Hill and talking to my Congress and senators. And we did not have anything but, talking points. And I was sitting on the floor, and I said, would George Mahon be relevant here? George Mahon was then chair of the House Appropriations Committee. So the next thing I know, I'm there in that room with him, and this is going to be coming up. But the large-scale piece of social insurance, how important it is for wars, now what seem to be endless wars, for the economic meltdown, for catastrophic events, for the societal racism, sexism, and various ageisms, the different institutional forces that channel us in different ways, the for-profit health system and long-term care and women's work. And all of these are still issues that we're doing a lot of work on. And most significantly, social insurance as a group are public programs for the nation state for which all financial books are open, transparent, and accountable to all Americans. The principles of morality, fairness, and democracy may be invoked in the guardianship and trust that these vital programs provide. So the debate, of course, is around generational interdependence. And so this is the Estes Table, where Harriet Myers is sitting. And she was my dad's last law clerk, and she actually turned him into a feminist. And just by showing me that how much he believed in her and how she was the best lawyer's lawyer he had ever encountered on the federal bench, and she could do anything. And that was an opening for me because I hadn't heard those words before. But my brother Carroll was a Supreme Court clerk to Mr. Justice Tom Clark, whose son we know is Ramsey Clark. And Dad was appointed by Eisenhower in 1955, so I've kind of gone backwards, but at the very end is Representative George Mahon. And when I called him from the Gerontological Society of America, Dad said, I'll call him. And next thing I know, in less than a week, Dad and I were in his office, Mr. Mahon's office, and that opening changed my life. I was in the room. I was at a table, the House dining room table. And what did he do? He shot me with 3 questions instantly. Okay, what grant do you want? And I said, Mr. Mahon, I'm here to speak for the importance of research and education and training in aging for the National Institute on Aging and for AOA, Administration on Aging, and for the National Institute of Mental Health Center on Aging, which then had no appropriations. So he said, well, why do families, second question, why do families abandon the elderly? And I said, Mr. Mahon, that is one of the biggest myths there is, that women and families provide 80% of the long-term care. And so this is a major policy problem. This is why we need research, one of the many reasons. And then he said, well, why do people quit working? And I said, Mr. Mahon, you are in a position where you run for office. If you get elected, age is good. Seniority, power, more power. And my dad, a federal judge on the bench, has got a lifetime appointment. So most Americans don't have that privilege and wear out earlier. So he got up and went to another room and said, get me the White House. This woman needs to meet Arthur Fleming. And so next thing I know, Dad and I are in the taxi going over there, and I'm saying, what am I doing here? But and of course, Arthur Fleming said, what grant do you want? And I said, I don't want a grant. I'm here to talk about appropriations that include the Administration on Aging. But oh, by the way, you need to give older people real representation on these state and area agencies under the Older Americans Act instead of just symbolic nothings. And so he assigned someone to work with me. So I was in the room and I was at the table. So, and Mom was at the table, and you heard a little bit about women may be at the table, but their voice may or may not be heard, and they may or may not be visible. And it was Harriet Myers at our table that made women visible and valuable. So Mom wrote these murder mysteries, and her lament every day was, it's a man's world. And this reminded me of the Hamilton, the 51 Federalist Papers in 6 months, running out of time, write day and night like you're running out of time. This is sort of my story. Writing every day you fight like you're running out of time, like you're running out of time. Are you running out of time? How do you write like tomorrow won't arrive? Why do you write every second you're alive? Every second you're alive, every second you're alive. So I was in the room at University of California, San Francisco, and it was, as that short said, the first opportunity to work with women. Got to be in the room, got to be at the table. And this is a medical campus. This is, yes, profound. So we went to work, as Robin Stone had mentioned, building 50 state databases, and we did the first elite surveys that had ever been done. So we were before these secondary databases that are public use that are so wonderful now. We did one from Medicaid and state discretionary regs and policies. We had meetings with the National Association of State Budget Officers, the National Conference of State Legislatures. We were all about policy, governors, counties, cities. And basically, the building the databases paved a major way for us. And I met Phil Lee actually as a result of the experience with Mr. Mahon. Somebody had told me on my campus, since he had just stepped down as chancellor, that I should get in touch with him because he knew a lot about Washington since he'd been assistant secretary under Lyndon Johnson. And when he heard that I had done this thing with Mr. Mahon, he was like, wow. And so I was in his room and at his tables, and we collaborated for many incredible years and books. And he introduced me to Wilbur Cohen, and he introduced me to Ted Marmer, and he introduced me to Dorothy Rice, and he made it possible for Dorothy Rice to come when she left the National Center for Health Statistics to my institute, that was in the room and at the table with a magnificent woman. So here we are to this day, breaking the Social Security glass ceiling. This is a report that the National Committee to Preserve Social Security did with the older women's, with NOW Foundation and with the incredible Heidi Hartman and the Women's Institute for Policy Research. So Bob Ball was in the room, and he gave me advice about what do we do about the fact that women are getting 0 years credit under Social Security for all their caregiving work, and they have less benefits because they have less years counted in the 35 years or whatever it was. And his direct quote, I found this piece of paper, I couldn't believe it, it was providential. Bob Ball's advice, 1997. Oh, that's easy, he says. When I say, what do we do about 0 years? He says, I'd give it something comparable to a disability freeze to either parent if they had wages below some specified amount. The disability provision, he knew he had to explain it to me. I'd never heard of it. Provision says when a wage earner is totally disabled, the time is not counted in the computation of their benefits. You get a credit. Nobody should be disadvantaged by periods of disability. And says child care is a provision is an easy thing to expand to a family and one that has a household person over 85. And anyway, so here he was, and here we are this week, A-Gen Poo and Ben Venti and the National Academy of Social Insurance with this incredible concept of detailed policy framing that brings formal and informal care and these many provisions together for policy consideration. So now we come to the next gens. Dusky benefited from Phil's passion on the Hill and his work with Bill Clinton. And so when she graduated from Brown, she came to Washington and did two major things. But she was in the EOB, the Executive Office Building, with very other privileged young graduates of the big name schools. And, but Dusky was assigned to the war room. She was in the Clinton war room for health reform, and her job was every day she I've got a little Congressional Research Service in the corner. She was a mini Congressional Research Service. Congressmen would call and say, well, what's happening in the health reform bill on this? And she would go do the research and then call the congressman or their staff back. And in addition, she had this unbelievable task of all the people from all the agencies would come in the room at 7 o'clock at night, and they would say, this is what happened in health reform today, in housing. This is what happened in this agency, that agency. And Dusky would take all that in and produce a newsletter that was handed out to all federal workers as they walked into all agencies. So, here's Bob Ball and Phil Lee and Dorothy Rice, our mentors, who've brought us in this room and this table, and Dusky too. So I'm giving you this is my grandmothering. This is my idea of grandmothering. Bringing, in 2002, this was the one on the left was my Christmas card to Bob Ball, and believe me, I got an unbelievable thank you back. And in 2006, my granddaughter Bridie is doing campaigning in full swing. So we're all in the room and we're all at the table. Think tanks, public intellectuals, data, actuarial and policy analyses. Voices rise and we're bridging the divides, the big issues, breaking the grassroots silos to bringing together the net roots. It's the time for coming together again. So this A to Z book was an effort to really raise the questions about who's not in the room and who's not at the table, and to advance knowledge and recognition and realization of dignity, equality, healing, social justice, and human rights. So this is the human rights space embedded in the public and the social. So I'm almost done. So because we're all in this together, these were my students who, in 2005, we organized Students for Social Security and Concerned Scientists in Aging. So one was for the adults in the room, and one was for the brilliant many students that we had. And we got grants, and Retirement Research Foundation and AARP were among several. And so this was all about dialogue, analysis, presence, and we went everywhere. We went to, we had teach-ins, we had student newspapers that got together across many universities. So it absolutely is an intergenerational issue. So this is the last slide, sister power. All of us are in the room, and we here are all in the room, all of us in this room, and we're all at the table. And we have a democracy that is in peril, and we have unbelievable privilege. The privilege of being able to channel what we already know at the right time and space. Consequential justice and injustice are revealed. We can do something. Hamilton taught us the responsibility of being in the room and at the table. We must take it to the max, and opening the rooms and doors to those who have been excluded from the rooms and tables in the day and the night lives we live. Thank you.